Martin, do you want to say just today's intro?
Yeah, so joining Phil and I today is Andrew Vorster. Andrew's done keynote speeches all around the world. He gets hired to look at innovation practices, structures of it. Phil and I have worked with Andrew before. He came on to give a talk when we were running the events with Google, and it was very successful and very enjoyable. So just building up the pressure for you, Andrew. Andrew, we're going to hand over to you now. Do you want to just tell us what you're going to be talking about and take over the screen sharing, and the show is yours?
Yes, hi guys. So let me just quickly pull up this because it will tell you exactly what I am talking about, and that is missed opportunities. There we go. That should be able to share, and are we getting somewhere there? There we go. Right. So the reason why I want to talk about missed opportunities is in my previous corporate role, I was responsible for establishing a team to track trends and to carry out horizon scanning, looking for opportunities in innovation, things that could fill up our innovation funnel. And part of that involved harvesting ideas from staff, from customers, from suppliers, from our general ecosystem itself. And all of this information, all of our bits of data and things that we were gathering, our anecdotes and everything, we were putting them into a wiki. Yeah, it's that old. I'm going back a bit further than modern day. And in the wiki, we would tag things. And because of our totally shite process that we had at the time, within 3 months, the biggest hashtag on the wiki when we sorted it into a word cloud was hashtag missed opportunity. And we had been missing so many opportunities largely because the way that ideas and opportunities would be evaluated is we would have a meeting about having a meeting to have a meeting about who should be in the meeting to actually consider what we should be doing, whether or not we should be taking up this opportunity. And right now, I think that one of the things that is the biggest barriers for opportunities is the fact that people will react with, but that's not the way it's always been done around here. Now, I'm using this picture of the farm that I grew up in South Africa because my father was very old and traditional and he hated new ideas. And this particular quote really resonated with me in my role of innovation, because the more successful an organization is, the stronger their corporate immune system becomes. And their immune system fights against change. People are resistant to change. They don't like change. Most people don't like change. You get a couple of people who embrace change, some people who, like Phil, Martin, myself, and maybe many of you on the call, are catalysts for change. But the majority of people absolutely hate change. They fear change. So they fight against change. And they don't like the way it is. And I've seen a lot of people during this crisis really fighting for, we want things to get back to the way it was, to get back to normal. We just want to go back to our safe space. And I think that right now, the winds of change are blowing strong, right? And this has been a tipping point, a catalyst. It's been a trigger for a lot of change. This whole COVID crisis has been it's challenging the way that things were, the way that things have always been. And we know that when the winds of change blows, some people choose to build walls and others build windmills. So we see those people that are building walls and just going down into protective mode and going, how can we preserve our old way of doing things? And a lot of this is resulting in people, just trying to take what they were doing before and doing it remotely, throwing technology at things. one of the biggest mistakes that I always say is when people simply do things without thinking, particularly when they start talking about digital transformation, is they end up with digital diarrhea. Same shit, just faster. And I've seen a lot of that now in this COVID crisis, where people have thrown technology at things and then they try and replicate their old world in the new. So if they used to be in back-to-back meetings for 8 hours a day in a corporate environment, they're now in back-to-back meetings for 8 hours a day on Zoom. Well, actually, what you should be thinking is there a better way of doing things? Did we need all those bloody meetings in the first place? Did every single one of them need to be an hour long? Do we just rethink completely? But something else that was a myth that we had to overcome in our processes that we had back then, and I think is very pertinent right now, is that the majority of people think only a certain kind of person can be innovative, or it's not my responsibility. It's somebody else's responsibility. It's not them. They're not the ones responsible for change. They're not the ones responsible. There's a department over in our organization somewhere with a label on the door that says innovation department, and we're expecting them to solve all the problems. So I see a lot of people sitting back at the moment and going, oh, the world is shit. Our company is shit. Our sales are tanking. This is happening. Our customers are all complaining. And they're not actually playing a part. They're not contributing. They're not doing anything because they're thinking that it's somebody else's responsibility. And one of our challenges in my team was we were trying to get everybody involved in the process of innovation, change, and transformation. Because, and you might have gathered by now, I love quotes. I love quotes because they succinct, they sum up things, and this was a great quote by Telly Whitney. We wanted the most diverse set of people possible to contribute to our thinking at all times. And it's so much more pertinent now during a time of crisis. We wanted to get everybody involved in thinking of the future, thinking of our opportunities, and right now, you should be doing the same, harvesting the power of your team, your customers, your suppliers, your ecosystem. You want a diverse set of inputs into your problem solving so that you can solve more problems better, faster. There's a great piece of work done by Harvard Business Review that empirically proves that more diverse teams solve more difficult challenges faster than homogeneous teams. But again, in trying to get people to contribute, a lot of them don't really understand, and they conflate innovation with invention. They think that innovation is all about inventing new stuff, and it's not at all. You see, the building blocks for change and transformation are predominantly already out there. And like Lego, they can be assembled in different ways. And right now, a lot of the challenges that you're facing don't need you to invent or create something new. It's simply learn, observe, watch what other people are doing, react quickly, and put things together and solve problems for your customers primarily. So when we were getting involved in this innovation, but the reason why I wanted to talk about missed opportunities today was the core basis of our whole innovative thinking, our horizon scanning process boiled down to simply asking 3 questions. I mentioned I was from South Africa, but living here for 20 years now has meant that I've adopted a couple of British things, and that's what? And simply it's asking those 3 questions. The first is, what is going on right now? And you should be thinking about what hasn't worked as the world has changed. What hasn't worked in your company? What processes are broken? Has technology been an enabler or an inhibitor in the way that you've been working? Has this crisis uncovered maybe key person dependencies? Some parts of your processes or supply that has been physically tied back to a location or a premises that hasn't enabled you to work remotely. What new relationships do you need to create, or have you had to create? What are new needs that are emerging from your customers? So just simply, what is going on right now? The second what is, so what? What are the implications and impacts of the things that you're seeing? Martin will often speak about habits and habit forming and the way that people, what new habits will form because of what's happening right now? People have been in lockdown for weeks and some places in months. The longer you do something, the stronger the habit becomes. Are purchasing patterns going to change? Are working patterns going to change? Of course they will. Probably they will change forever in a lot of ways, or at least for the foreseeable future. So what are the impacts and implications on you personally, on your team, on your supplier and customer ecosystem, on the industry as a whole, maybe even on societal level? What are the impacts and implications of what is going on right now, both right immediately and in the long-term future? And then the final one is, now what should you be doing about it? The great thing about this crisis is it's given us an opportunity to experiment in a lot of areas. I've called this in a previous blog post, the world's biggest POC in remote working. It's been forced upon us, but many of us have wanted this kind of a trigger or catalyst to be there so we can prove the point of remote working. But it's not only remote working that this is challenging. And right now, people will forgive you if you don't get it right the first time, because at least you're trying. So right now you can experiment with a lot of things that maybe in the old world wouldn't have been acceptable, would have been classed as too high risk, would maybe even have been frowned upon. Now you can go, you know what? Let's just try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and we can use it as a learning. If it works, we can roll it forward, we can take it forward, and we can decide what happens. What do we want in the new normal that comes after this? Because there is no going back. There's no going back to the way it was. This has been a turning point, and life will never, ever be the same again. So we have an opportunity to take the best of what our experiences are now and roll them forward. We've also got an opportunity to correct the worst. But whatever happens, we will be creating a new normal going forward, and let's try and make that a lot better than the old one. So that's my context about missed opportunities. And I hope that you've enjoyed that. And Martin, fire away. You wanted me to keep it under 15 minutes so you can ask me some questions. You go for it.
Wonderful. Well, Phil, please jump in if you've got any questions to kickstart us. For now, the first question I wanted to ask Andrew was, is there any issue with people not knowing how or when to change?
The time is always now to change. There is a lot of, so I know that a lot of people work in risk-averse organizations, but we know that change is constant. You know, it's an old and trite saying, but change is constant. We have to constantly be adapting and recreating, we need, all organizations and individuals need to be in a state of perpetual transformation. We've got to carry on growing and moving forward. We can't stay still, because if we do, the world will change around us and we will become irrelevant in the first place. So when you say how and when to change, that's going to be down to the risk profile of your company. Some people want to be on the bleeding edge. Some people want to be fast followers. Some people are quite happy to stay as they are. And I think right now, during this crisis, if you can do something differently, take the opportunity to try. I've seen, so a lot of the work that I do is in fintech and financial services. And I've seen companies that would normally take 3 months to have a meeting about doing something have taken 3 days to release a new capability for their customers. It's been phenomenal, the response, and a lot of the conversations within the financial services community has been, hang on, if we could have done that in 3 days, why have we never always done it in 3 days? And it's making people challenge, and a lot of people are going, oh, but you know, we've got to make sure everything's right. Sure, but they did that in 3 days. Why couldn't they all have done that before? So no, there's no right answer, excepting for, as far as I'm concerned, now is always the best time to change. You know, that's it.
Okay, cool.
I think also that my feeling on it, Andrew, is that, I mean, you mentioned risk before. I think risk is a really interesting, how to put it, a really interesting concept, right? Because I think that risk is always subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder. What I consider to be risky, somebody else might not consider to be risky, and so on. So I consider inaction to be the thing at the moment which presents the greatest risk to organisations, because there's ample evidence to historically to suggest that's the case, whereas other organisations will see risk as being, you know, taking any action as being innately risky, spending any money at the moment as being innately risky, and so on. And I say that because, you know, I think that we have a job to do to, or do you believe we have a job to do to continue to educate people about the different risks that their organisations might be able to, or might be facing as we go forward, not as a means of compelling them into, you know, action with consultancies like the ones that we run, but just in the sense that I feel as though a lot of organisations now are going to be accruing a lot of problems in the future simply because they're not thinking clearly about what the real risks to their business actually are, and they're very, very short-term focused. What's your view on that?
Oh, I do think, look, risk is a massive, so for those people who don't know me, my academic qualification is in foresight. I am a qualified futurist. Yes, it is actually a real job, trust me, and it's also a real qualification. And one of the things in foresight, when we are considering future scenarios, possible, plausible projections for our customers, possible paths that they can take. We work on a thing called the cone of plausibility. So we've got boundaries to it, and we say, here's all the things that are possible and probable, and what you've got to do is decide for the organization what's plausible, what do they want to, what's their preferred future that they want to build towards. And I wouldn't call it a limiting factor, but a strong factor that they need to take into account is risk. You have to take risk into account. As you say, there's a risk with everything. And so people will have different risk appetites depending on what part of their innovation portfolio, what part of change and transformation that they want to go forward with. So again, just to bring in some examples, you might decide that the risk of not doing something is far greater than the risk of actually doing it and getting it wrong. But there are other areas where you certainly wouldn't at any cost lower your risk tolerance, because that would be core and brand damaging to what you do. So I do absolutely think risk is a core factor to consider. Don't just go out there. Actually, the T-shirt that I had worn to the Google thing had said, vision without action is a daydream, action without vision is a nightmare. And that action without vision being a nightmare has a large amount to do with the risk. I don't want to encourage people just to blindly go off and go and do stuff for the sake of doing stuff and be seen to be doing stuff right now. What I'm saying is consider all the things that you need to do, but definitely take risk into account. It is vital. Don't go and risk your brand or your customers at this point in time just to be doing something.
Well, no, I agree, but also there's plenty of organisations that were that are risking their brand and their customers by simply not doing the right things at the moment. So again, it's what are the questions of risk? It's like if you're in the airline industry at the moment. I mean, I believe that British Airways, for example, is probably doing immense damage to its brand at the moment. Not in the sense that it's going to have to potentially release a quarter of its workforce, because that is what it is. But in the sense that even just things like actually not staying true to its legal obligation to provide refunds to people whose flights are cancelled and making that an incredibly difficult process actually significantly undermines trust in a brand that is actually built on trust. Now, the interesting, question for businesses like that, I think, is if that's the case, well, it's probably a case of near-term versus long-term trade-offs, because you probably go, well, listen, if we give everybody a refund now, there's a danger that we might financially collapse. And then whatever trust we build in our brand is not going to be non-existent anyway. So we'll have to just deal with the financial realities now and deal with the reputational realities later on. But it's hard to see where innovation gets looking in that context at all, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. And so facing the big challenges like that, if we're talking about, let's take British Airways as an example, where I was talking about the opportunities right now. So if I was sitting inside British Airways, they're all fighting fires in terms of all their flights are grounded and everything like that. But there's still opportunities, yes, on the macro scale. They're going to be looking at the financial losses. Are they going to come out the other side? But within that, on a micro scale, there will be hundreds of thousands, possibly, I don't know, of family and people, I don't know how many people that they employ, who have been faced with a new way of working. Possibly they've all been furloughed, and in order to keep up morale, in order to engage their staff, to keep everybody on track, the managers within that, there's nothing stopping them from constantly giving their staff just some hope and saying, okay, so this is a crisis. If you were us, how would you be solving this right now? What do you think we should be doing? And if they were getting that feedback, and it could be diverse, it could be things from, I like this way that I've now been able to work. I'm working from home. I want to be able to do that more in the future. However, some of the other ones might be simply, you know what, my friends and my family have all been looking for refunds, and I think our refund process is shit, and we are failing on it. I think we should be doing this. There could be constructive input from their own staff, from their own organization, that helps them think their way through this, with them going, okay, so if we can't financially afford to do this at the moment without putting all of you out of work, are there, can we double down on people's airline miles, give them points, vouchers for the future? We'll write checks now that get cashed later in terms of discounted flights or whatever. Who the hell knows where the airline industry is going to go? But they need to be thinking at the moment, thinking their way out of the problem, as opposed to simply being constrained by thinking, if we do this, we're going to go bust right now. They need to be thinking about all of the possible paths. That's one possible path of their future, is if you were going to map it now as a futurist and say, what are the possible paths for British Airways? A very possible path is they go bust and they're dead in the water within the next 6 months. There is no British Airways. That's a nightmare scenario. What's a fantasy scenario? Well, a fantasy scenario is lockdown lifts, everything goes back to normal. There's a vaccination, and we don't even have to change the configuring on our planes. That's fine. That's great. Classify that as a bit of a fantasy within the next 6 months. I don't think it's going to happen. But what are other possible futures that British Airways could take? Well, we emerge from this as a stronger brand because of the way that we've dealt with our customers and the experiences. Okay, how do we get to that possible future? Because at the moment, we're providing a totally shit customer experience. What do we need to do in order to provide a better customer experience? So think about all the futures. Don't just get hung up on the nightmare scenarios. Think about every single scenario in between. Pick the one that you would prefer to come about and start building towards it. If I was internal within British Airways at the moment, I would be chomping at the bit to try and say to them, look, guys, we've got to do the right thing. This is brand. Forget about the financial implications right now, because it's go for broke. If we suffer the financial losses further on down the line, so be it. But right now, we have got to protect our brand, our customers, our customer loyalty, that kind of thing. Right now, otherwise there will be no brand for us to go forward with in the future anyway.
Brilliant, Andrew. Thank you. So just before we go, we really appreciate you taking us through that, Andrew. I had a request. So tomorrow we're doing a mind hack. So for everybody on this call, I thought we'd just try something a little bit different. I'm going to give you 2 options, and you can vote in the chat function. Just tell me which keyword you prefer, right? So we've got one option, which is the challenging gains of being present. So your mind actually being present, and why it's so difficult for us to do that. And then we've got the why of the stress that's going on in the crisis, helping us understand our brains. So your choice is present or crisis. So let's just do a quick voting on the chat to end today. So do you want present or do you want stress? Sorry. Present. Good. Four votes for present so far. We'll go with present. 1 for stress. Scott, we'll do a 1-to-1 session if you want on that one. Bit of a stress relief for you. Anyway, that was Andrew Vorster. Thanks for your votes today. Thanks for being present. Recession Rebellion kicks off again tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.